This is Ben Shapiro at something known as Fred and Linda Allen lecture series. Now, I've done a little bit of research on that. It looks like it's for the Young Americas Foundation.
These people are buying ads everywhere. They're crazy.
And I don't think that has
Fred
anything
and
to do
Linda
with,
Allen sounds like your next door neighbor,
I guess
right?
Fred Allen is a comedian, which, maybe from like the World War II era or something like that. But and yeah, like this is in Ben Shapiro. He's talking about climate change. Everyone knows. I forget the YouTuber's name. We need to look that up.
Regardless, but the guy who did the takedown of when Ben Shapiro, as maybe a college student or just a young pup.
No, he was a media person.
Oh, okay. Like he just looks so young. We all know and have seen the clip of him saying to a crowd when talking about climate change that
you don't think you're just gonna move if
just sell your house. Everybody, right. And when the tides begin to rise, everybody who is going to be affected by the tides rising will just be able to sell their house. Hey, numbnuts! Nobody's going to buy the underwater houses. But here he is updating that just completely poignant point.
Which says, again, this doesn't mean there's nothing we can do. It means what we ought to be doing is the thing that will prevent the 83 million deaths, which is why I'm very confident it will prevent the 83 million deaths, adaptation. This means, for example, that we build seawalls. The simple fact of the matter is that New Orleans exists below sea level. When the seawalls, when levees were breached because the levees were poorly built, it killed 10,000 people. When the levees, last time around, this last year, there's a major hurricane. It swept directly through the exact same area, and pretty much no one was killed. The reason being, the levees were much better built. When you're looking at coastal low-lying areas, seawalls have been built in places in Miami, in places in Seattle.
The Miami point is a very important one, Brad. If you can just take us back for a second. If you look at, they've brought in, I forget where it is, Denmark or whatever, whoever does a lot of these seawalls.
I forgot about this.
They've brought in, Florida has actually brought them in to consult, like, hey, we need to do this to save our cities too. And they found out, I think it's like limestone is the bedrock underneath all these Florida communities. And that's permeable, which means that water soaks it, which means you can't make walls out of it, or the water will just go under the wall through the limestone and soak up underneath. And so like Florida is really, really screwed, and you can't you're gonna have to build a wall and a floor and a whole bunch of
that apartment complex, the sinkhole, I mean, there's sinkholes all over. The apartment complex that fell in, is horrible. This is so this is like a propaganda. I mean, this is what we have to be thinking about is, 5 years ago, it would have been ridiculous for us to think that the Republicans could recruit young people. And it's happening through, crypto fascist communities, as we've talked about, through these foundations. They're putting so much money and so much energy into recruiting just enough people so that they win on those small little margins, because they've gerrymandered and they basically gerrymandered the country so that they have to win by like a small margin. And it's just enough. Who goes to these conferences?
Well, let's finish the clip and then see if he, approaches a point that isn't just like, human innovation is going to solve all of this, going to solve these existential threats to our humanity. Even though like conservatives have evolved from it's not happening to it's not man-made, it's just natural, to, well, it's happening. And we're just going to create a wall on Miami Beach to make sure that all of these things survive. I thought Florida was the conservative paradise. Shouldn't you guys be a little bit more conscious about it? But continue.
Low-lying areas. Seawalls have been built in places in Miami, in places in Seattle. Geoengineering, which is a methodology that's being explored largely in some of the northern European countries for actually changing the climate itself by, for example, shooting particular types of material into the air. These sorts of solutions are things we should be pursuing. They're a lot easier. I mean,
not to be pro-China, but China's been doing that since I remember like the Olympics over a decade ago. But I mean, good luck that this is going to counter CO2.
China, you say?
To do because technology is a lot easier to do than anything remotely approaching a global carbon tax, which will, number one, be unsuccessful, and two, will not mitigate the effects on the climate nearly as much as you're talking about. Human beings are great at adaptation, and we suck at mitigation. And as I've said before and been mocked for it, the simple fact of the matter is over the course of the next 100 years, when you see all these maps and it's like this area will be flooded and all those people will be dead. No, because they won't be living there. Because as it turns out, when the tide rises, people move inland. This is what has been happening throughout human history. Not a huge number of people were killed, presumably, on the land bridge between Russia and Alaska that from which Sarah Palin could see. Right, when that land bridge ended up being covered up in water, there weren't tens of thousands of people who died in that because it took thousands of years for that to be covered up by water.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's probably because there wasn't a large population center.
Right.
Yeah. Well, there also weren't
they didn't have
people.
cities.
No, but just in general, like we have so many more people too. It's like, even if you were going to take that theory, it was what are we, like 100 times, 1,000 times, more in population? This is so ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, what and who's going to build these seawalls, right? I thought he was all for small government. This sounds like this is going to require a massive amount of government investment. Did he bring up the possibility of the federal government subsidizing this when infrastructure was being debated?
And the other thing that this focus, and we talked with the folks of La Ruta del Clima about this on MR back at COP26 or whatever that was. And so there's this focus on, and Ben Shapiro's mentioned this a few times, accommodation. We can accommodate to this threat as opposed to mitigate it, right? But there's a third factor that folks, particularly in the global south, will remind us of, which is about loss and damage. What happens about the stuff that we didn't mitigate or adapt fast enough to save? And there's already a whole bunch of communities that are already irrevocably destroyed by climate change. And what are we going to do for them?
Yeah, well, that's the point, right? This is an argument that is geared towards, it's incredibly Western and Americentric, Northern Hemisphere centric, and wealthy nation centric, because, maybe there will be
slow-moving crises are not crises.
It's all right. Yeah, don't worry. Maybe there are some capitalists that are going to want to protect their investment in Miami Beach, and they're going to build some sort of wall, or maybe some forward-thinking governor will invest some state money in protecting, I don't know, parts of their city, for example. But when it comes to the communities in the global south, communities around the equator that might be affected by increase in hurricanes and storms, etc., that Ben Shapiro is uninterested in their communities having seawalls built around them. I mean, they might not have the capital to do that. Of course they don't, because and so essentially he's dooming those countries and those communities, even though the United States is disproportionately contributing to this problem. So we're going to contribute to the problem disproportionately. The brunt is going to be felt by these other nations who don't have the resources to build these mitigation these walls and these I don't know, different structures that I also have my doubts that are going to make a huge difference anyway. But regardless, so they're going to bear the brunt of it. And Ben Shapiro is going to say, well, that's the natural way of doing things. That's essentially natural selection. That's exactly what it is.
It's a natural selection argument. But even if it is a natural selection argument, which is based off of battle of the fittest and, essentially capital, it's still not true. Okay, so global south, look at Bangladesh, which is underwater and has the highest concentration of it's the most densely populated place on the planet. Still, even with that, let's just look at the US. Okay, every single major city in this country, there is not one place on the map in the United States where you can escape. I mean, this is the delusion now of certain Republicans who are so addicted to not paying taxes in the short term or keeping their income or finding some sort of financial benefit out of climate change in the short term is, I actually think, a form of psychosis, because these are the people who want to build cruises. I mean, seriously, they have like these massive cruise ships that they've bought where they all go on the cruise ships and go from climate disaster to climate disaster. This is a true thing that these like insane billionaires are doing, these like fascist billionaires. And these are also the same people, the Peter Thiels, the Elon Musks, these are the same people who are pushing to destabilize the US dollar. These are the same people who are investing in technology, and they're putting money into these foundations which are spreading these messages. All for what? Like, they're actually delusional at this point. You can't escape it. Every single city in America is dealing with. New York City cannot afford to mitigate, as he says, or basically, like they're talking about building a wall here. Well, it's also people in cities like marginalized communities, public housing. Thank you, Robert Moses, for creating the disaster that we live in terms of climate preparation. it's delusional thinking at this point. I just don't understand, like, why can't we just have a conversation about how these people who are driving capital are absolutely insane? They're out.
They've lost their mind. I mean, they have oil
mind.
spilling out of their ears, and then like it's just anything we can do to avoid the actual painful work of getting off fossil fuels. And like then, I mean, the guys, Mr. Facts and Logic. There is a really obvious logical solution here. It's obvious. It's just the one that none of these guys want to talk about because it might be a little bit painful to wean off of.
You know what?
It's necessary.
8 quarters, they're not going to have a planet to live on. So if you want to think in terms of capitalism, like it's great, you know, you took one final cruise around the planet before we imploded. Like what?